Hello and welcome to the first video-based lecture or class for EDMA 5230. I just wanted to show you that I really am a person and give you the opportunity to actually see me even though you don't have the opportunity to interact with me live in this particular session. Today I wanted to kind of introduce you to some key ideas regarding successful grant writing. We're not going to get to anything really specific today. It kind of is an introduction to some of the key ideas behind grant writing. And then over the next couple of weeks in class, you're going to be reading some articles and engaging in some activities that are going to give you more specific information about the different components involved in grant proposals and keys to writing successfully funded grant proposals, which obviously is the goal. So again, today's activities serve only as an introduction and kind of get you into the whole idea of writing funding that you can apply for from various agencies to augment what you're doing with technology, perhaps provide professional development, get the technology in the hands of the students and other learners in a way that's going to most contribute to the teaching and learning environment. We're going to begin with a little activity that you're going to come back to several times during the video. And in order to make this work, I need to have you open a document. So you are going to navigate to the Blackboard website. Once there, you are going to click the Week 6 folder. And once you are in that folder, go to the lecture folder, and it says video in parentheses. And then within that folder, there's a link to the Week 6 activity document. You're going to go ahead and open up that document, which looks like this. It's just a word process document with a couple of columns, and below that there are some other sections that we're going to be completing a little bit later. You will see that there's a column 1 and a column 2. We're going to use just column 1 for the first part of the activity. And what you're going to do is in that column, when I tell you the topic, you're going to generate as many ideas as you can think of that would be creative ways to use the object that I'm going to name for you in just a bit. So this is kind of like the game's categories, where in that game a letter is rolled and there are categories that you're supposed to come up with words that begin with that particular letter. And the goal is you get a point if nobody else that you're competing with also has that particular word written down. So you're trying to come up with unique, creative uses. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to complete the activity. I'm going to have a countdown timer that will appear on the screen for you. So my recommendation is that you resize the window with the word process document so that you can see the window with that document and the video at the same time. So I'm going to ask you to pause here for just a second, get your window arranged, and then when you have your windows arranged so that you can see both the word process document and this timer, you are going to you're going to go ahead and use the 2 minutes to write down all of the things that you can think of, creative uses for, this is what the object is, for a pencil. So I'm giving you 2 minutes. You're going to start now. Write down or type in all of the creative things that you can think of for the use of a pencil. Keep writing. You have 1 minute left. Again, be creative. Try to think of things that no one else will come up with. 30 seconds left. Fifteen more seconds. And that is time. So take a look at your list. How did you do? Were you able to come up with some creative things that you think other people wouldn't name if given the opportunity to participate in the same activity? Obviously, you're not doing this with other people in the room, so it's hard to know exactly what others might have come up with in their list. But the idea here is really in the brainstorming process. I found this comic. I thought it was actually kind of appropriate for this activity, where the woman says, "We're brainstorming here and there are no dumb ideas. But if we weren't brainstorming, that would have been a really, really dumb idea." Well, okay, maybe not. But in this case, the concept of writing and brainstorming and coming up with activities where there are no restrictions is really to try to connect with the person or people who are going to be reading your grant proposal. The reality is that often there are multiple people who submit proposals for a limited pot of money. And so the people who are evaluating the submissions are reading lots of different documents. And the reality is that a lot of them kind of come up with the same ideas, and that means that your own may or may not really stand out. You really do want the readers to remember your document. You want it to score well. You want it to stand out among all of those that were submitted. So you really need to think about what is going to make your proposal stand out. Right now, one-to-one computing is a huge deal in all levels of education, and so I can guarantee you that grant readers and evaluators are going to be reading all kinds of proposals to try to get funding for schools to get to a one-to-one environment. Bottom line is that that in and of itself isn't very creative. What you really want to think about, maybe that is the technology that you're interested in, but what will make your proposal stand out is if you can describe unique uses of the technology, if you can employ unique evaluation methods, if you can describe a group of learners that maybe stands out from groups that are likely to be targeted by other people who submit proposals. Anything you can do to set it apart is a plus. And sometimes doing some simple brainstorming up front can be really productive, especially if you can do it with a group of people who also might be creative and can help you to think outside the box a bit. So the next thing I'd like you to do is to go back to the word process document, and in column 2, I ask you to provide a rating. So if we go back to the document, for each of the items that you had written in column 1, and don't go back and add anything else now, I want you to stick with what you already had, I'd like you to give it a rating of a 1, a 2, or a 3. So a rating of 1 is that this is probably an okay use of a pencil, but it's probably not really that creative overall. And a 3 would be, this is really a creative use. It's not very likely that other people would come up with this idea. And then obviously a 2 is someplace in the middle. So you're going to go ahead and pause the video, go through and actually do the ratings, a 1, 4 low basically, and a 3, 4 high, meaning really creative, for the items that you had written down during your brainstorming session. So after you complete the ratings, then go ahead and start the video again. So having you generate ideas behind how a pencil could be used, something common, and then thinking about how that might be perceived by people who are reviewing that idea, gets to really the common or the core of grant writing, and that is that grant reviewers and evaluators, whoever is providing you with the funding sources, they really don't fund stuff. They don't fund things. They really are looking to fund ideas. And so that's why it's so important and critical for you to come up with innovative ways of using the things that you propose, instead of just thinking about wanting item A, item B, or item C. What are you going to do with that that makes it important? And so you want to think about ways of framing your ideas in ways that are both creative and innovative, but also meaningful. So you don't want to send them a description of a project that might be really, really innovative, but isn't practical to carry out within a school setting, or it doesn't match school curriculum or the standards or anything like that. So you really want to think about creativity and yet at the same time practicality. So grant writing, in order to help you move forward with technology related ideas, is kind of like putting a puzzle. You need to begin by brainstorming. You need to come up with some creative ideas that would be fundable. And like I said, you need to think about things that are going to be unique and not necessarily things that everybody else is going to come up with in their own proposals. And then when you actually begin the writing process, don't write from the perspective of sharing what you want in terms of the things or the technology or the stuff, but think instead about what those objects or items are going to facilitate. What are they going to allow you to do? What is going to happen as a result of obtaining these particular items? That's what you really need to focus on. That's what's going to get you the bucks. You need to have a very clear description of all of the elements of the project or activity, so that the funding agency is well aware of what their money is actually going to buy. So in doing so, there always has to be some evaluation process. How are you going to be able to communicate with the funding agency to let them know that you have actually completed or achieved what you really set out to achieve? And what you set out to achieve is not funding X, Y, or Z. It's producing some learning, some outcomes that are able to be communicated to the funding agency. And one last thing about that is, even if your main objective, I guess, in writing a grant is to fund certain technology, don't forget about staff development. If there has to be training involved for you and or for others to be able to fully implement the project or activities that you're writing about, you need to provide that as part of the description of your plan. There might be in-kind money or time that your school or district could provide. It doesn't have to be that you are soliciting funding for staff development, but don't leave that out. If you purchase equipment, or if you're buying something related to curriculum development that will help you create better technology integration, then you need to address the issue of time for appropriate staff development. So we're going to go back to the word process activity for part 3. And in part 3, what I would like you to do is, in that particular table, I want you to write about some idea for a piece of technology that you would be interested in obtaining, or something related to technology that would facilitate teaching and or learning. So you're not going to write a lot of details here. Just what is it you are interested in getting? And then just write down a sentence or two about what you would like to do with it. So it doesn't have to be anything really complicated right now, but what is it that you would most like to obtain? And what is it you would do with this thing if you were to actually get it? So you're going to go ahead and pause the video again and then think about how you would respond to those items, fill that into part 3, and then save the document if you haven't done that already, and then come back to the video and resume. So over the next 2 weeks, when we get more into some of the specific documentation that will help you to become more proficient at writing grants, one of the key things that will emerge is the development of objectives. Now, in some of the discussion boards over the last week or two, some of you have written about objectives a little bit in terms of part of the staff development sessions that were either successful or not effective for you had components where some of the staff developers made you write objectives. And so I assume that all of you generally know what an objective is just based on the training you've already had. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to bring it up in the context of grant writing because what it means is that when you articulate an item that you want a funding agency to provide for you, you have to be able to link it directly to measurable goals or measurable outcomes. And most often these outcomes are related to student learning. However, they could be instead related to it could be teacher growth that would be measurable in some way. It could be another group like parents or administrators. So the objectives don't necessarily have to be student learning objectives, but they do need to be something that you can very explicitly state and then be able to gather data in a way that allows you to measure them. Often there are both short-term objectives and long-term objectives, so there might be things that could be accomplished within maybe a 2-week period after working with the particular device that you're requesting, or there might be longer-term objectives that could be measurable over maybe a semester or an entire academic year. So using the concept of writing objectives, I'd like you to go back to the word process document, and in part 4, I'd like you to type in one possible objective that could be something you communicate with a funding agency that would help the reviewers understand what purchasing that piece of equipment or maybe if it's money for staff development, what their funding is going to actually help you to accomplish. So in writing the objective, again, it should be very clear, it should be measurable, it should be something so that you know that you have actually achieved a goal. So you'll pause the video again, go to the word process document, type in one objective, and then restart the video. Welcome back. So the other thing that you need to think of that is often a make or break part of a grant proposal is how you communicate to the funding agency how you'll evaluate the success of the project or activity. So all grant proposals require some type of evaluation section within the document so that they know and you can tell them whether you've been successful. And that evaluation component should be tied back directly to the objectives that you have articulated. How will you know whether you've actually achieved the objectives? So in what you write, you can include both quantitative measures. So in the case of student learning, it could be test results, it could be other performance-based results. Maybe there's a writing assessment with a rubric attached to it. So they could be standardized measures, but they don't have to be. They can also be more teacher developed or publisher developed materials, but something that you can report numerically. And if you have a compare and contrast, maybe last year's scores compared to this year's scores, that might be a way where you can actually demonstrate that the whatever it is you got funded did something. You could also do a pre and post test. You could do a lot of different things, even what percent of students reached proficient levels, something that you could report as well. So there's a lot of ways of being able to manipulate that evaluation data for it to be meaningful, but you need to specify up front what that's going to be. You can also use qualitative measures. You can gather information from interviews, you can do some surveys. So it doesn't all have to be reporting of scores, and that's very important to consider. You could even potentially video record. You could do some sharing of documents. So there are other measures, other quality measures that aren't necessarily numeric in nature. So think about all the different ways that you could help the funding agency recognize that their dollars were put to good use. But however you decide to structure the evaluation components, you need to think about very clear measures, very direct measures that you can report to the agency as evidence that their money has resulted in something very positive and favorable. And the evaluation should be a very well thought out and planned section of the document because it will make or break whether you get funding. You can't just include it as an afterthought. You really need to think about meaningful evaluation measures within your proposal. So for large grants, specifically federal grants that are often a little bit lengthier than funding from a smaller agency, there's often a timeline that gets included as part of the grant proposal, kind of like this one here. And you can see that the evaluation section has a timeline for collecting the data, for analyzing the data, and finally for writing the final report. So evaluation is not just something that happens at the very end of the project, but something that's happening throughout to be able to collect the data that are necessary to evaluate everything throughout the project. So the last part of the activity is to come up with evaluation measures that would allow a person who's reading your proposal to know whether your objectives have been met. So write in good, clear sentences, go back to your objectives, and then think about how you can measure whether those objectives have been met. So again, you're going to pause the video, go ahead and type in some evaluation criteria, and then you're going to resume the video one last time. The reality about grant writing is that there is actually more money available than people have time to write. And even now, when money's a little tighter than it had been before, there's still a lot of funding out there. So private foundations will probably be the biggest area that you can explore for potential funding sources. And I'm going to kind of talk about that a little bit more. Local companies often are also willing to provide funding. Home Depot, Target, for example, they do provide money to schools if teachers have really good fundable ideas. State and federal government funding opportunities are certainly available, but those are generally larger in scale than what I'm thinking you're going to write for in this particular class. Typically, those grants require collaboration between groups of people and not single proposals that come from an individual. So I think with more experience, state and federal grants are certainly worthy and can bring in a lot more money than the smaller foundations and companies can provide. But it's always a good idea to kind of start small, get your feet wet, and then after you've done successful grant writing, then you can write to some of the bigger agencies. So in Blackboard, I do have links to, if we go to the syllabus and major assignments folder, under the grant proposal area, there is a hyperlink there to a folder that has links to a whole bunch of different possible funding sources. These are mostly private agencies that they specify the target for funding, but there's an awful lot of them there, and some of these are searchable. Like this one, the Find the Top Foundation Funders. If you have a general idea, you can do some searching. This one right here provides you with a directory and a calendar, so you can match maybe a funding idea to a date with a timeline that you think might be reasonable. So you don't have to use one of the sources that I have in these hyperlinks, but if you don't know where you can go to apply for funding, then the list that's in Blackboard might be a good place to start. And I guess I've kind of talked about this already. I really am looking for a smaller scale proposal, not a really big proposal here, which would require a lot more collaboration with other people in order to satisfy the requirements of the proposal. So the actual grant proposal assignment begins with an RFP. An RFP stands for Request for Proposal. And every funding agency has an RFP. It basically is the set of instructions that you need to follow to be able to successfully go through the application process. One of the reasons that proposals sometimes get thrown out is that the writer didn't follow the guidelines provided by the funding agency. So in this class, I want you to follow the RFP for the funding agency that you select. If the funding agency says there's a maximum of 5 pages, then that's what you need to adhere to. So I don't want to give you any false parameters because every funding agency wants slightly different things. Now there are going to be some commonalities between all of them, and that's what we're going to focus on over the next couple of weeks in the instructional part. So the assignment that you have, I'm going to go back to Blackboard here. Actually, I'm going to open up the Word document for the grant proposal assignment. So that you are going to identify something that relates to technology in some ways. So it could be a device that you wish to have or equipment that you want to have for your classroom. It could be money for staff development related to technology. It could be getting yourself a sub so that you can build curriculum that integrates technology. It could be participation in a tech conference. I mean, there's an endless amount of possibilities in terms of what you want to what you might want to request funding for. But it does have to have a technology connection. This is a technology class after all, and though I realize that funding is available for non-technology related things, I really want to see that technology component here. So once you identify your idea, then you need to find a funding agency that would likely be willing to fund that idea. And there are agencies that are funding ideas at both the K-12 level and at the higher ed level. So those of you who are in the higher ed arena, you have opportunities available to you as well, and some of them overlap. Some of them don't care whether it's a higher ed institution or a K-12 institution. So in the class, you're going to begin by writing a prospectus, which is just a general idea and overview of what ultimately will become the grant proposal. So the prospectus is really pretty short. You're basically going to provide just a summary of your proposed project or idea. What is it that you're going to request to have funded, including prices. And then you're going to provide a hyperlink to the agency's RFP. So all of this is going to be due by the 25th, but the week before that in class, I'm going to ask you to provide a few details about it so that you can get a little bit of feedback from peers in your class before you submit it to me for more formal feedback. So kind of think about that now. We're kind of moving toward that deadline. So that's kind of where we're headed. And then after submitting and getting feedback on the RFP, the actual proposal will be submitted later, and that will include everything that the RFP from the funding agency requires. So if there's an application page, you fill that out. If there are very specific sections, you're going to make sure you include headers with those section titles and so on. And you want it to be written well, you want it to sound good, and you want it to be a potentially fundable idea. What I do say in the information is that you don't necessarily have to go to an agency where the funding date is still active. For example, if they had a September closing date, I would still allow you to write to that funding agency because a lot of times the grants are cyclical, and if a date has passed for this academic year, it's likely to come up again. So while I really would like for you to think about something that you could actually submit and get funded, if you can't find anything where the date is still out in the future, then you can write to something where the date has already passed. So that actually concludes the video for the class. Make sure again that you save your word process document, and you are going to upload it by clicking the submission link, which is inside the week 6 activity folder inside the video folder. So you'll see it labeled and you'll know where to go. It's worth 3 points basically for participation and thinking about the different things that I talked briefly about. Certainly we'll learn a lot more about grant writing over the next 2 weeks. Like I said, this was just a brief overview, but hopefully it gets you thinking in the right direction about where we're headed over the next couple of weeks. Have a great day, and if you have any questions, definitely get in touch. Bye-bye.